Hello, everybody. My name is Janae Kizzy. I am the events coordinator in the virtual here that is Providence Public Library. And I'm here with
Christina Bevilacqua, and I'm Programs and Exhibitions Director at Providence Public Library and Techno-Skeptic. So I can see you and you can't see me, sorry. But I'm very excited to be doing this first event in this really exciting series. So,
absolutely. So thank you everyone for attending this inaugural session of Providence Public Library's Adaptive Practices, 6 Artists, Redefine Isolation and Distraction. Tonight's session is a workshop by artist and Providence Public Library Creative Fellow Becky Davis called An Ode to Home. Adaptive Practices is a series of virtual interactive presentations and events developed by Providence Public Library's Creative Fellows in response to the widespread expressions of anxiety about living with unrelenting uncertainty, fluctuating productivity, and debilitating isolation during the pandemic. Founded in 2015, PPL's annual Creative Fellowship provides an opportunity for one artist to work for 6 to 8 months within the library's special collections on a project that coincides in topic and timing with PPL's annual exhibition and program series. Each year's fellowship focuses on an artist working in a specified discipline, rotating between visual art, performance, writing, and music/sound on a 4-year cycle. The fellow receives a stipend, funds to help cover the cost of project materials, and intensive research support. The program is deftly stewarded by PPL's curatorial assistant and library witch, Angela DeVeglia. I wanted to give a plug to Angela, who may or may not be on the call right now. Angela, if you wanted to add anything to that, please do.
No, that's perfect. I wrote all of that, so I've already said what I needed to say.
Yay! Yay! Great. Thank you.
Thanks to Angela for having stewarded all these amazing artists through these years of projects. The Creative Fellowship Program provided us with the unique opportunity to bring together these 6 artists who've all received the fellowship. And since we're all now in a time of uncertainty, and since artists' endeavors often encompass venturing into the unknown, enduring fallow periods of reflection and synthesis in which no immediate product results, and working in solitude when research or experimentation is necessary, we asked our fellows to share their work with us in a way that would allow us to see and maybe even experience how they navigate and negotiate these conditions of uncertainty and unfamiliarity. And the result is this project.
All right, and a few technical notes. That's me. The bulk of this session is being recorded. It's being recorded right now and will be uploaded to the library's website and archives so that others can have a chance to experience Becky's presentation. The second part of the session, which will involve more personal accounts and discussion, will not be recorded. If you do not want to be recorded at all, please turn off your camera or message me privately. And you can do that through the chat, which again, there's a chat button at the bottom of your screen. During Becky's presentation, I will be muting everyone's microphones. If you have questions, please send them via the chat window. We will be monitoring as we go. At the end of this program, we encourage you to register for the next session where we will feature your own odes to home. You may also wish to share them via our hashtag, hashtag ode to home PPL.
So our presenter tonight, Becky Davis, is an accomplished artist and activist whose work has been featured at Hera Gallery and the RISD Museum, among many other venues. In addition to her 2018 PPL Creative Fellowship, that same year she was awarded the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts Fellowship in New Genres and the RISD Museum Artist Fellowship. She's also a recipient of the St. Botolph Emerging Artist Award. For her PPL Creative Fellowship, Becky created immersive installations and performances centered on the theme of hair as part of the exhibition and program series theme Hairbrained. We are so excited to have her here tonight to talk about her recent work, An Ode to Home, which is part of her Praiseworthy Deeds and Infamous Iniquities exhibit at the University of Rhode Island's Fine Arts Center Main Gallery. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Janaea and Christina. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you so much to everyone for sharing virtual space with me tonight. I'm really pleased to be sharing my work with you. I also want to thank PPL at large and particularly Special Collections, my family in Special Collections, and Angela DeVeglia for heralding the Creative Fellows Project. It's really been instrumental and inspiring to my practice. My time there is something that I cherish still. And thank you all for putting this series together. Thank you for running such an incredible program and being the institution that you are. I appreciate it. Thanks so much to Janaea and Christina for facilitating this incredible series. I'm really excited to see how it develops. And thank you to my fellow cohort, Carrie King, Walker Metling, Micah Salkind, Laura Brown-Lavoie, and Kelly Erickson. If you haven't already, please sign up for their upcoming presentations. Micah's starts on Monday, and Laura's will start next Wednesday. All right, so just one more thing before we get started. If you have any questions for me through the duration of the talk, please feel free to write them in the chat, and I'll try to answer them as we go. So it feels as much like a conversation as possible. Okay, so what led me to make An Ode to Home? And that would be the very first work that put me on the path to An Ode to Home was my thesis work, a video experimental documentary called Whose Name Was Written Water. So pew pew for the next slide. Thank you, Janaea.
No problem.
Okay, so Whose Name Was Written Water was the story of my family. It gave, its purpose was to not only give context to my art making practice, but also to help me work through and process some research that I was doing into my family history that at first was unrelated to my art practice, but gradually over time became like the entirety of my practice. Next slide, please. Great. Okay, so just so you have an idea of sort of the breadth, or really like the important things that you need to know about me in order to understand where Ode came from, or what its foundation was, are the first few minutes, or first 2 minutes of this video, Whose Name Was Written Water. So we're going to share just a bit of that right now. In 1850, a 20-year-old female mulatto was listed on the Parker family's slave schedules. 11 years later, her name appeared on an inventory of her owner's estate when he died.
When his property was sold to settle the probate proceedings, she was purchased by his son, along with their 6 children. They had 10 more in the years that followed, living illegally as husband and wife. Her name was Charity Ann. His name was Isaiah. They were my 4th great-grandparents.
So in order to make that video, I had to do a lot of footwork and on-the-ground research in Harris County, which was only about 30 minutes away from where I grew up, but a place where I had not been before working or doing this project. I had driven through it countless times, but had really no understanding of how tied my family was to the land there. And in the process of taking those photographs and really studying the place, I realized that I had to look deeper into the physical landscapes in order to understand not only the history of the place, but also my connection to it. And that led me on a path to interrogating not only my own memories of place, but also my connections to the constructed landscapes and the stories or histories that they communicate. Next slide.
Sorry.
That's fine. So that video was completed in 2017. In August of that year, Charlottesville happened. And in the wake of Charlottesville, we realized, or I realized, for the first time, I really thought about the insidious nature of Confederate monuments and how they empower the wrong type of people. That entire situation through, or it made Confederate monuments a national conversation. So 1 year later, on the anniversary of the Charlottesville March, I launched a new project called In the Shadow of Dixie. Next slide. So In the Shadow of Dixie was an 8-city road trip. There were several elements to it, but the first was research. I intended to research the monument's origins, how they came to be, why they were there, who constructed them. I also wanted to study the structures themselves and the locations where they were constructed. Part of that also was inscriptions. What did they say? The inscriptions are kind of a covenant with the people that put up the monuments to their future posterity. So what did the inscriptions say? Were they coded? Was there any sort of information that could be gleaned for them as to why the structures were created in the first place? Thirdly, I wanted to hold space on each structure. All 8 of these cities were cities that I once called home. So I had connections to the communities there. So returning to those places and holding space on the actual monuments was a huge part of the project. Fourthly, while holding space on those monuments, I wrote to politicians. One thing you have to know about Georgia Confederate monuments is that they're protected by a state law, and the state law was put into effect in 2010, and it was just strengthened actually last year. So while holding space on each of the 8 monuments, I wrote to every politician in Georgia that had jurisdiction over that space, asking them to make a public statement about the monument itself, whether they believe that it should remain in place and not contextualized or not, and asking them to reconsider their relationship to the monument. Finally, I wanted to share all of these findings with the public. In addition to holding space and writing the politicians and learning about the monument's history, it became increasingly important for me to share what I was learning with others. In the process of making this project, I realized that my relationship with Columbus was different from the other 7 cities. So I want to click through these images. This is Louisville, Georgia, which was a town that I went to high school in. I graduated from high school there. I learned how to drive in the city. And at the heart of the city, and the literal central area of the city, sits a slave market. The last slave market, or the last standing structure of its kind in the state. What was important to me about this space, or what was my purpose in staging an intervention in this space, was the way that it's presented. My request was that it's presented with more empathy and honesty, rather than a place for celebration. And it's seen as, it's viewed as sort of they're very proud of the structure. It's featured prominently on the town's mural. There are numerous postcards for over the last 100 years that depict the structure. So it's something that's viewed with a lot of pride. Yes, we can. Yep, this is a postcard from the 1930s. Next slide, please. These are some more images that I took from the space itself. One of the most interesting things about this space is that over time, it's always been considered and marketed as a slave market. In fact, the bronze plaque laid into the foundation, or bolted into the foundation that you can see here, was placed in like when the structure was renovated in like the late 1920s, 30s. It was paid for by the United Daughters of the Confederacy. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see UDC, which is like their name, the United Daughters of the Confederacy. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yes, right there. Thank you. This was a postcard that I designed and printed with the help of Jacques Bidon at AS220 to send to politicians for the Louisville intervention. It features a quote from James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. At the bottom is an image of it's a video still from the video documentation that I took. In each place, I took extensive video documentation, not only to document my intervention of the site, but also because I had no idea what was going to find me or what was going to happen in these places. So the video documentation was as much about ensuring my safety as it was documenting the process of the intervention. Next slide, please. These are scans, digital scans of all of the postcards that were written while underneath the shade of the structure. So everyone from the city council, Louisville is in a very rural part of Georgia, so there weren't actually that many. So this includes the entire city council, the state congressman, the state senator, and then the U.S. senator and congressperson, and the president as well. Next slide. I have a very short clip of the video documentation of Louisville, Georgia. One of the things that I think is very interesting about the video documentation from this project is that each video is created in a way that it becomes almost a portrait of place. There isn't a lot of narrative or, a lot of dialogue. It's really just exploring the location through various images and shots, not only of the place itself, but of me and my interaction in the space. So like I said before, it became quite clear in sort of working my way through the documentation of this project that Columbus was different. In fact, this project was held in 2018, and I have not yet shown or exhibited the documentation from the Columbus intervention, because I felt in some sense there needed to be, I don't know, almost a prequel, or I needed to tell the story of my relationship to Columbus before I could really talk about my relationship to the structure, the Confederate monument in Columbus. So an ode to home was sort of came from that space. Yeah, next slide, please. So when it comes to Columbus, I'm still very much connected to that place, unlike some of the other cities. Louisville, up until this project, I'd never returned to Louisville after I graduated. Like the day after graduation, my high school graduation, I left Louisville and I never went back. So Columbus was my first home and is still my home in the sense that my grandmother lives there. I visit there at least once a year to spend time with her, sometimes more than that. I went to college there. I finished my bachelor's degree there. While I was in school as an undergrad, Teresa Tomlinson, who was the mayor of Columbus while I was an undergrad, I'm sorry, who was the mayor of Columbus while I was working on this project, was one of my advisors as an undergrad student. She taught there at Columbus State University, and she helped advise me as I and a colleague or a fellow classmate of mine wrote the charter to reinstate the College Democrats organization, which when I first started school there was not in existence. It had, there had been a charter at some point, but it had been closed for a number of years. So the reason why I mentioned Teresa Tomlinson is when she became mayor, I was very happy, very proud, knowing that you know, I had this connection to her and I knew her as a person. I felt confident that she had my same values at heart. But around the time that I performed in the shadow of Dixie in Columbus, she had made statements, public statements, about the Confederate monument, saying that she didn't see anything wrong with its existence there. And it hurt me, it hurt a lot of people that had really done a lot to support her over the years. So another reason why I felt that my relationship to Columbus is just different. Next slide, please. I want to take a step back now from my work to talk a little bit about the inspiration for An Ode to Home. Arthur Jafa has been a huge inspiration to me as an artist and as a filmmaker. When I made Whose Name Was Written Water, it was I was very much inspired by his work titled Love is the Message was Death. It was incredibly influential to me. And this piece that I have featured here, Apex, was a collection of images that Arthur Jafa had collected over time out of magazines. It was kind of like a scrapbook or a mood board where the narrative was created not just by the images themselves, but the relationship of one image to another. So the storytelling in this work is really through sequencing and juxtaposition. And the importance of music or a rhythm is really pivotal to his work. And that's been incredibly influential, not only to Whose Name Was Written Water and An Ode to Home, but to all of my video practice. The interesting thing about Apex is that even though this work started out as a series of images, it evolved over time to become a slideshow of sorts. I have a link here, and we will have this in the chat as well. If you want to know more about Apex or Arthur Jafa, there's a really nice piece that came out last December at MoMA about his creation of that work. Oh, on that note, we'll also be sharing the links for the previous projects that I spoke about in the shadow of Dixie and Whose Name Was Written Water. If you're interested in seeing the entire video, it's almost a 17-minute short documentary. We'll have the links for those as well for you in the chat. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so, oh wait, there should be one before this. Oh, so Stephen and Deb asked if I heard from any of the politicians in response to my postcards. I heard from 2 politicians. One was from Athens, Georgia, who kind of responded in a pass the buck type way, saying, oh, well, this is a state, it's a state law, so I support you, but there's really nothing that we can do about it on the local level, which was absolutely true. But my response to that was, well, you can let your constituents know that this is something that's important to you, and you can advocate for change in your local area. And that's actually something that another city that I visited, Decatur, Georgia, they were already in the midst of trying to get rid of their monument, and they have for some years. This new law that was passed in April of, actually almost a year ago, in April of 2019, made it more difficult for local cities, local municipalities to remove Confederate monuments. So even if a local community wants to move or recontextualize, remove their monument from public space, it's now illegal for them to do so, which wasn't the case before last year. So it was really sort of a very insidious sort of move by lawmakers to strengthen the law. They said that it was really more for monuments in general, not particularly for Confederate monuments, but those are really the only kind of monuments that they feel need protecting now. Okay, thank you for that question. That was a great question. And actually, the other politician that I heard from was from Decatur, actually, and saying that they absolutely support the move for local communities to have more jurisdiction over the monuments that are in their space. In fact, after the law was passed last April, the Decatur, Decatur, I think it was their, I think that they have it wasn't a city commissioner, the county commissioners. So it was the DeKalb County commissioners voted to recontextualize the space where the monument is, which is right in front of the old courthouse. And they did that by the end of the year, like by fall, actually, they had constructed a bronze plaque that does a really great job at not only contextualizing the monument itself, but telling how it got there and really drawing connections between the monument itself and white supremacist activity. And the most recent iteration of In the Shadow of Dixie as an installation, it features Decatur and their story and what the county commissioners did. Okay, so this is an image of an ode to home. So an ode to home is constructed of 42 images. Sequencing and visual storytelling are pivotal to this work. There are 3 rows of 12 images and one row of 6. So from the beginning to the end, it tells a story, not just by what the individual images are, but the relationships that one image has to the next, and even what one image has to 3 or 4 other pictures down the line. Some relevant themes here are text, the use of archival documents, historical markers, monuments is also a pervasive theme. Standing tall, or the imagery of like people standing tall and erect, public and private heirlooms, the ideas of joy, celebration, grief, and memory, collective memory and private memory. Next slide. Okay, this is just a detail These images were printed and not mounted, but just affixed directly to the wall with magnets. So you can kind of get an idea of what the images look like together as a collection. Next slide, please. This is another detail. In the foreground is an image of my grandfather. Right after him is an image of the inscription about from the Confederate monument in Columbus that talks about bravery. Right after that, there's an image of my grandmother, my great-grandmother, actually holding my mother as a baby, as a newborn. And then right after her is an image of a gazebo that was, it's erected in the historical district of Columbus. Okay, next slide. Okay, so to give you sort of a better idea or a more clear picture of how storytelling is used to connect these images, the next 6 slides are images in a sequence of 6. So this is another picture of my grandfather. He's a little older here. And this is in our front yard. Yes, next slide, thanks. So the next slide is of a bronze plaque in downtown Columbus. It's in a place called Heritage Park. So Heritage Park is a place that attempts to communicate the historical significance of industry in Columbus. But its historical, the way it represents history is, in my opinion, woefully inadequate. This particular image relates to the first, in that my grandfather, after retiring from the military, worked in the textile mills. My earliest memories of him were going to visit him in the textile mill. There was a particular mill called Swift that produced cotton denim, and that's where he worked. I would sometimes go with my great-grandmother to drop off a lunch for him, and I have very vivid memories of like seeing cotton, like little, like cotton fluff, like blowing through the air, and the smell of unrefined cotton. Next slide. Okay, so going from the textile image to this image of my mother at her wedding. This is in my grandparents' backyard. So again, thinking about the idea of you're moving from this sort of what seems to be a very melancholic photograph of my grandfather, and then moving towards the historical, like the historical plaque of textile mills, into this image of my mother at her wedding, in a very joyful gesture of like throwing the bouquet. Next slide. To this, another historical plaque, this time of Baker High School, which was the high school that my mother attended. And she actually attended at the peak of integration. I just learned very recently that during the integration process, while my mother was in high school there, the school was set on fire while students were actually attending class. So there's a lot of, the high school is no longer in existence, but there's a lot of trauma and unspoken trauma, at least for most of my childhood, dealing with that location. And it's interesting to think about how pivotal the experience of attending Baker High School was to my mother, and how sort of bland and whitewashed the historical plaques to it are. And this historical plaque, next slide, actually sits right outside of a Walmart. Yes, there's a slide. So this is my son reading that historical plaque in front of a Walmart parking lot where the school once sat. Next slide. So that's my son. The previous slide was my son now. This image was taken of my son when he was about 2 years old, again in my grandparents' backyard. So it connects through just the sequence of 6 images. It goes back and forth in location from these locations around the city of Columbus, always sort of pulling it back to the physical location of my my home and the landscape surrounding my home. Great, thanks. Next. Okay, so I have a very short video that I made that sort of communicates the entire collection of 42 images. So we're just going to watch that, so you can get an idea of what the entire collection looks like. I apologize for the lag there. Okay, great. So that brings me to the end of my presentation of An Ode to Home. So next I have an invitation and a provocation. What does home mean to you? How do your surroundings tell the story of who you are? And I would like to invite you to make a video in response. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. So you have a couple of options that I'd like to propose. So the first is sort of a DIY approach to video making. If we can watch that first video real quick. I made a very short example of just manually flipping through images. So if you have printed photographs or a collection of images that you would like to draw from, it can be as easy as you flipping through those images manually and recording that with your cell phone. Okay, so next is I checked out a couple of different apps that you can download on your phone, and this seemed like InShot is pretty user-friendly. I'm going to guide you through a quick tutorial on how to use InShot. but it can give you a more, if you're interested in a more sort of traditional slideshow type situation for your work, InShot will give it to you. Okay, if we can watch that video real quick while that's on. Okay, so okay, Janaea, can we stop your screen share so I can start mine? Thank you. Awesome. So I'm going to open up my screen. Okay. And I'm going to lead you through a quick tutorial on how to use InShot. Is everyone following? Thumbs up? Okay, so this is what the InShot landing page looks like. In order to make a video of slides, you just hit on video. We can start a new one, and then you can just add the photographs that you want. So I made geez, where'd it go? Photos. Here we go. Horse King. Okay. So I'm just going to, I made this little folder of images. And so you can just click through the ones that you want. It's better if from this page, if you select the images you want in the order that you want them on. It's not crucial that you do that, but it helps you. Okay, when you get to this page, if you have, you see how I have sort of a long orientation, or the aspect ratio is wider, and they're not all the same, but you can make them uniform by hitting canvas. And I just set mine for full. And then if you click these two arrows on the left, you can apply to all. And then if you need to, you can go through each one and sort of adjust it. So I'm going to select this and then hit canvas again and then slide it over. You can also zoom it, pinch to zoom it from here. But I want to see the little sugar dish. And then you can click through at the bottom. It has each slide that you have. You can click through and adjust them any way you like. You can slide through them. If you need to change the duration, I set my my video for each slide using 2 seconds. So you hit trim, you slide down, use the slider to maneuver to 2 seconds, and then you can hit apply to all on the left. Are there any questions? Is everyone following? Great, thank you. Okay, so once you go through, I had music to mine. You don't have to have music to yours, or you can if you like, and then hit save. Once you save, or if you want to like share work in progress, please use the hashtag Ode to Home PPL. Okay, we can stop sharing my screen, Janaea.
On it.
Thank you. Okay, so that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. Does anyone have any questions?
Janaea, will we send, I know we're going to send follow-up stuff. Will we send some assistance on how to do what Becky just showed us how to do?
Yes, so we are going to, yes, we can also put in a tutorial, but we also have a Google form, and I just put the link in the chat. So when you create your own Odes to Home, you can upload them onto our drive, and then Becky's going to go through and add them to a presentation that you guys will get to watch in session 2. You'll also see in the chat a link to registration for part 2 if you haven't already been registered. But I will be giving everyone who's attended this, this Zoom call the invitation to the next Zoom call, so don't worry if it's filled up. Yes, and midweek, everyone who's registered will receive an email, again, with this link, with tutorial stuff, and with any notes from Becky.
And if you need any help, or you have any specific questions about this app, or just need to talk through or ask questions about what you're working on, please reach out to me on Instagram. I'll write my handle here. And I'll be happy to help. Uh-oh.
I got you, Becky.
Thank you.
And here's Becky's handle.
Great. Thanks, Janaea.
Yeah.
Thanks again, everyone, for joining. I really appreciate you being here.